Good morning, everyone. This is Research in Daily Life 1 class. Um, this morning, I will be discussing to you next topic, which is all about ethics in research. Okay, research is a necessity in our world, right? Without research, there can be no development. There can be no inventions. There can be no innovations that makes our lives more convenient and more colorful. Indeed, research is a necessity in our world. Scientists have discovered a lot of concepts around us through research. Likewise, researchers were able to study the possibilities of developing medicines and other technologies that make our lives better in many ways. Um, we have medicines, medical researches develop medicines and other technologies that makes our lives better ways, di ba? Better in many ways. Those are all products of research. So kung wala ang research, so wala tayong medicine, wala tayong technology nga ginagamit ato karon, wala tayong there will be no development at all. No? There will be no development at all that would make our lives better in many ways. However, some researchers also involve potential harm to many people, including the research participants, the researchers themselves, and other stakeholders. So, sometimes, no, naapoy uban nga mga researcher that in their research, they will involve potential harm to many people, including themselves, di ba? The researchers, and especially the research participants and other stakeholders. That's why we have we have to examine whether such research is ethically acceptable or not. No? When we say ethically acceptable, such research is pass certain ethics, di ba? Ethics review, and then it is a guarantee that in undergoing such research, there will be no potential harm that it can give to the research participants, to the researchers, and even other stakeholders. Example, okay, there are a lot of researches conducted that um, pose potential harm to its stakeholders and even the participants. Humans have been subjected to experimentations that became harmful to them. So, sa research, um, in research, we are not that strict in research if the participants are not humans. No, there is no, it does not involve humans. Also, pero, uban research nga, dili human ang ilang participation, participants, but plants. So, naapoy, in utilizing also plants, animals, so we have also to consider biosafety, no? Safety, animal welfare. But pag human ang atong participants, especially in the field of social science, we have to take carefully ethical standards. So we have to follow certain ethical standards. We have to ensure that in doing such research, we do not involve potential harm to the participants, to you researchers, and even other stakeholders. Example, there are a lot of researches that pose um, potential harm. No? Example is the human radiation experiments in the US. For example, human radiation experiment. So, in doing such experiment, you are going to expose the human to certain radiation, no? And that radiation, knowing the fact that radiation is not good for our body and or for our health. So, it is ethically unacceptable. So, unethical. Prison Experiment at Stanford University by Philip Zimbardo. No, imagine prison experiment. You will be put into prison for a certain experiment. Naakay mo sugot, no? And then, what do you think the potential harm it can give to your respondents, no, to the participants? No, you are to consider the physiological harm, psychological harm, emotional harm, social harm. So all of those must be carefully considered. Series of medical experiments made by Nazi Germany. So medical experiments. For the information of everyone, the medical experiment or experimentation are usually done not on human, no? Usually ginagamit nila animals by also observing animal welfare. So, especially karon sa vaccine, it is very hard to develop vaccine because the stakeholders are humans. What if masayop sila sa vaccine, ma-inject sa mga tao? So, that could give, di ba, potential harm. So, in order to ensure that the development of vaccine for COVID-19 is um, not harmful, no, is for the betterment, making our lives for the better, it must be carefully examined. That's why, di ba, ang pag-develop sa vaccine, nag-undergo sa pila ka trials, and then pila ka experiments, and usually experiment is conducted through to animals, no, by observing animal welfare. Okay, what was wrong about these researches? So, I have mentioned already, di ba, nganong wrong to siya nga mga researches. It is the fact that the participants did not give full consent to be involved in the experiments, or writing or research ended up harming them in various ways. So, based on the given example, it is really a fact that participants did not give full consent not to be involved in the experiment. So, pag ang participant gani wala naghatag siyang consent to participate in your research, so you cannot force such participant to participate. Or if the research ended up harming the participants, that could be certain um, unethical practice, no? It violates ethical standards. Okay, what about the researches conducted by senior high school students? Is there a possibility that we might harm our respondents and stakeholders? What harm could we possibly do to our respondents? Yes, no, the answer is yes. There is a possibility that you senior high school students might harm your respondents and even your stakeholders in conducting your research. And there are different types of harm that you can give. So the types of harm are um, physical harm, diba? Emotional harm, so on and so forth. So why ethics is important in research? Ano importante man si ethics in research? Ethics is important in research in order for the researcher to conduct a research without harming the respondents and harming themselves, and that is through the applying ethics in research. So we can avoid no harming the respondents and harming ourselves, researcher, if we apply ethics in research. That's why ethics in research is really unimportant, no? We have to considering ethics and research is very important. What is ethics? When we see ethics, it referred to as moral principles that influence the individual's conduct, behavior, and practice. So something to do with moral principles, the principles of what is right and what is wrong, which influence our conduct, our behavior, and our practice. Since morality is our judgment of right and wrong acts based on socially, culturally, and religiously accepted distinction, ethics is the principle that we consider as right conduct based on morals. In the context of research, according to Mears 2009, ethics is the application of moral principles in the planning of research, conducting the research, and reporting the research. So sa context ni research, Mears 2009 emphasized that ethics must be carefully applied, no, in the planning of research. Sa pagplano pa lang daan, unsa di akong gusto nga topic for research. So you have also to consider kung kani nga research ba makahatag ba siya potential harm sa imuha researcher, sa imong respondents, or even other stakeholders. In conducting the research, you should ask the question, how should I conduct the research without harming the respondents and without harming myself as a researcher? So, and even in reporting the research, ethical consideration must be carefully considered. Okay, this means that it is important to consider ethical actions during the whole process of research, from the conceptualization to the dissemination of the research results. No, ethical actions during the whole process of research start from the conceptualization down to the dissemination of research results. Ethics must be carefully considered. Okay, it should be evident to the researcher that his responsibility is not confined within what he feels, deadlines, time constraints, funding limitation, but it extends to what the respondents and the public would feel during and after the research. So, pag mag-research gani, tadi lang, ato ang self, atong i-consider nga, hapit ang deadline, gamay na lang kay ang time, limited na akong funds, no? But also you have to consider the part of the respondents, no? What the respondents and the public would feel during and after the research. So I have to cite an example before. In my research class, there is a student who conducted his research, and as to time constraints, gamay na lang kayo ang time. So hinahitabo iyang respondents kay grade 11. So and then ang grade 11 po, busy po silang requirements. Ang iyang gibuhat is ipangkasabaan niya ang iyang mga respondents kanang dili mo participate sa iyahang research. So dili na siya mao. It's not a good practice, no? If the respondents would really say that they will not participate in your research, you have no choice, no? Dili nimo sila ma-force because after all, we have to ask consent from the respondents. That's one ethical consideration. Thus, an ethical researcher should be able to balance between these responsibilities and necessities. Dapat kabulutan mo balance, no? Sa tong responsibility as our researcher and the necessities of our respondents and our necessities. Example. If you want to assess the English-speaking difficulties of senior high school students in Baguio City, you need to understand the possible risk or harms that may be experienced by the respondents. To you as the researcher and to the school where the students are studying, you have to consider. Para sa imuha, taon po di mo imong harm, no? Risk sa respondents, the school where the students are studying, you have to consider. No, ang respondents, imong study is you are going to assess the English speaking difficulties. So imos lang paistoryahon. So it can be nga they can be harmed, maulawan sila, di ba, in front sa public kung di sila maayo mo English. So that's social harm, psychological harm. So daghan kay taog types of harm nga i-consider. Okay, FAQs, frequently asked questions. What harm could you commit when you will just be making an assessment of speaking difficulties? So, that's what I've said. Even a simple assessment of speaking difficulties, you can involve potential harm to your respondent socially, no, psychologically, if maulawan siya, no? What could ethically go wrong before, during, and after the research? Okay, this time we will be discussing the possible harms that researchers might commit in doing research. What are the possible harms? The types of harm are the following: physical harm, psychological harm, financial harm, and social harm. So these are the types of harm. So physical, so pwede nga in doing research maka-add tag physical harm sa research sa respondents or even sa imuha. So mag-conduct kag research dito sa critical area, so pwede nga ma-involve ka, no? May butang ka sa risk, physical risk, psychological harm, financial harm, and even social harm. So let's discuss each of these types of harm. First, physical harm. Physical harm when a person feels physically risk that will endanger his or her body brought about by his participation in research. Physical harm ang tawag ana. Kung ma-feel nimo nga naa ka sa physical risk or naa ka sa danger, imong physical body is in danger, no, in participating the research, so dili na siya pwede. So for example, human rejection experiment. Unsa ang type sa harm nga ma-expose ato? That's physical harm, no? Pag mo participate ka ato as a respondent, possibly nga you will be put into a physical you will face possible risk or harm, diba, concerning your body, no, brought about your participation in research. That's physical harm. Psychological harm, these are risks that will endanger the respondent's cognition, emotions, and or mental functioning brought about by his participation in research. Psychological harm, no? Emotions sa respondents, no? Assessment of speaking skills, no? Maulawan siya, so matandog yung emotions, cognition, or mental functioning brought by his participation in research. So you have to carefully consider psychological harm. Financial harm, especially on the part of the researcher, no risk that will endanger the respondent's financial condition brought about by his participation in research. Ang example is a researcher, no? Sobra gasto ra kaayo, so posible nga mabutang ka sa financial risk. On the part of the respondents also, dili dapat ma-engage, no? Nga ma-endanger ang financial condition sa respondents. Siya pa gani ang participate, makagasto pa siya sa imong research, no? Paadtuon mo sila sa inani. So ikaw dapat mo adto sa ilaha as a researcher. So dapat ang respondents dili sila mabutang sa alanganin financially. Social harm, risk that will endanger the respondent's social circumstances brought about by his participation in the research. So social being social being, no? For being a social being, yang socialization, yang social interaction, no? Social other social circumstances na apektuhan because of his participation in your research. So these types of harm must be carefully considered. Although there could be a lot of ethical and moral considerations when it comes to research, researchers just need to always think about the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Do not do unto others what you do not want others to do unto you. So following the golden rule um, um, emphasize a great possibility that we can avoid certain ethical violations. No? Do not do unto others what you do not want others do unto you. The golden rule. Okay, things that research should consider. So there are three things that research should consider. No? Scientific soundness, how sound your paper is scientifically, researcher fit, and ethical soundness. When we say scientific soundness, the validity of the study being undertaken, how valid your study is, no? Based on the technical reliability of the study, based on the standard principles and processes of conducting research, how valid it is, does it follow scientific method, step-by-step process, is it systematic, and then are the data to be gathered are all accurate, no, valid, reliable, so scientific soundness. Also, researcher fit. So, in conducting research, we must be fit, no, in a particular topic that we are doing. Maunang, before students like you are engaged with the research, so there is actually discussion of the methods of the methods of research, the process of research writing dapat introduce man. So it refers to the qualifications or the characteristics of the researcher. Dapat you are qualified to do a research, no fit para sa imo. Ethical soundness refers to how the research protects the respondents. So let's say ethical soundness, it discuss how are you going to protect your respondents, no? Dapat dili mabutang sa alanganin ang respondents and even yourself as a researcher. Another big consideration that is expected from the researcher is the avoidance of committing plagiarism. So plagiarism is ethically unacceptable, no? We should not plagiarize. Now, what is plagiarism? Is an act of taking someone else's idea or work without proper acknowledgement of the original author and passing the idea off as one's own. That's plagiarism, no? Nagkopya kag idea. Sir, di man tanan akong gikopya, idea raman. That's still plagiarism. You copy a work, any type of work, no? Write up, even model, wala mo gi-acknowledge ang original author and you pass it as your own idea, that's plagiarism. And that is penalized under the law. Plagiarism can happen accidentally. For example, if you are careless in your note taking. So, it can be, no? Di mo gin maiwasan nga, accidentally, you can commit plagiarism. Especially kung careless ka, tanga ka in your note taking. According to the University of Leicester 2010. That's why, in doing research, dapat accurate, no? Research is accurate. Dapat careful ta, no? This can mean that you get mixed up over what is an exact quote and what you have written in your own words, or over what was an idea of your own that you jotted down or an idea from someone text, no? Panalitan, na kay nabasa, din man, sige, idea ra kung kopyahan, ako rang i-rephrase. That's still plagiarism, no? Isang synthesis na siya, basta you copy the idea, or if possible, kung copy, you have to copy the text, that's plagiarism. So we have two types of plagiarism. So research is a public trust that must be ethically conducted and so trustworthy and socially responsible if the results are to be valid and reliable. So research is a public trust. So in doing research, no, ang purpose is you have to relay information, your findings to the public. Therefore, it requires public trust. Therefore, it must be ethically conducted and trustworthy, no, and so trustworthy, socially responsible, if the results are to be valid and reliable. Roeg 2002 states that plagiarism has been traditionally defined as taking of words, taking of image, ideas, etc. from an author and presenting them as one's own. That's plagiarism. Plagiarism is associated with phrases such as kidnapping of words, no? Yeah, like kidnapping of words, kidnapping of ideas, that's plagiarism. Fraud and literary theft. Nangopya kag poem, nangopya kag story, that's plagiarism. Plagiarism can manifest itself in a variety of ways, and it is not just confined to student papers or published articles or books. Daghan, plagiarism can take many forms. There are two major types in scholarly writing. Plagiarism of ideas. You copy the idea, you pass it as your own. Plagiarism of text. You copy the full text and you pass it as your own. That's plagiarism. In order to avoid plagiarism, responsible authorship practices must be observed, and it is an important part of research. Lastly, according to the Philippine Health Research Ethics Board, PHREB 2017, there are specific ethical considerations that must be embodied in a research or by a researcher. So, PHREB emphasize specific ethical considerations that must be embodied in a research or by a researcher in order to avoid violations of ethical standards. So these are the following. Social value. No, in doing research, there must be social value. Scientific validity, valid atong method, no, systematically, relevance to the community and national needs, so suitability of dissemination plan and recipients, that's social value. So in doing research, there must be social value. Informed consent, no, respondents are informed, stakeholders are informed, there must be voluntariness, walay pugsanay. Comprehensibility of information and capacity to decide, that's informed consent. Risks, benefits, and safety. So in doing research, we must also assess, no, there will be assessment of risk, favorable risk-benefit ratio, and access to favorable research outcomes. So you consider na siya, risk, benefits, and safety. O kung imong respondents kay animals, so animal welfare, no, you have to safety of animals, biosafety for plants. So these are the following. Another specific ethical consideration is observing the privacy and confidentiality of information. Even the information of your respondents, it must be held confidential and private. No, respect for right to privacy and mechanism to protect confidentiality. Justice. So there must be fairness of selection process, appropriate care, compensation, reimbursement, and access to benefits. That's justice. Okay, transparency, management of conflict of interest, sharing of relevant information to participants, honesty in participation, and disclosure of research results. It must be transparent. Kung saan ang result mo, dito ang result. No tampering or no manipulation of data. Qualification of researcher. Researcher, before doing such research, must have appropriate education, training, and experience in doing research. Adequacy of facilities, supportive of protocol procedures, and well-being of participants. There must be adequate facilities. And community involvement, especially for anthropological studies, sociological studies, there must be community involvement, respect for local traditions and culture, community empowerment, acknowledgement of participation. So, still, our respect for local traditions and culture must be observed in doing research, no? Especially if you will be doing an ethnography of the Subanen tribe in the Zamboanga Peninsula, so you will leave the community, you will be involved in the community, Subanen community. You have to respect their local traditions and their local culture. Thank you. That would be all. Thank you for listening. I hope that you have learned something. God bless.